I'll be speaking to Crystal Zevon, one of the 50 or so of the Women's Peace Delegation who tried to get into the Gaza Strip last week to show solidarity with Palestinian women on the International Women's Day. She's a longtime activist for peace and justice who's worked with Code Pink and Occupy DC and other organizations. She's currently in Vermont. Good morning.
Good morning.
When did you get the bad news you wouldn't be allowed into Egypt?
We got the bad news upon arrival in Cairo at the airport, March 5th.
Could you describe it? I mean, where did you come from?
Well, I was coming from Vermont, and then I met up with a friend in Northampton, Massachusetts, and we went actually first to D.C., to the AIPAC protests, and also the Student350.org protests at the White House. And then we flew out of New York on March 4th. It was March 5th. By the time we got there, we flew into Vienna, and then from Vienna into Cairo. And my friend approached we got our visas, changed some money, and then my friend was ahead of me in the passport stamped line, whatever you call that. And she had been denied entry into Egypt a couple of times and she camped out actually at the Rafah border where we were trying to enter Gaza for 2 months in 2012. And she got right in. So I didn't think for a moment that there would be a problem with me, having never been to the Middle East at all. And they looked at my passport, looked at me, looked at my passport, looked at their computer screen, and said, "Go sit over there."
And when did find out that "go sit over there" meant you couldn't get into the country?
Well, we didn't know for some time. I mean, the woman behind me was coming from Denver, and she also was told to sit over there. And there were these benches back behind where the passport control was. And then a few more women were sent over there, and then they sent us into this little office, which is where Medea Benjamin had been held. It's the immigration office, and there were a men's cell and a women's cell on either side of the main office, and held us there for several hours. And they were ostensibly, checking to see if we could get in and so on, what was wrong. We were demanding to know why we were being held, and they just shrugged their shoulders and said, "Well, we don't know. All we know is our computer screen says you're a security risk."
Mm-hmm.
So it was interesting, and we were, at that point we were trying to be cooperative, sort of assuming that if we did the right thing, they were going to let us in.
Mm-hmm. Now, at some point, you weren't cooperative. There was some kind of a sit-in or a protest.
Well, what happened with our group? I was among the first group, and we were there after maybe 4 or 5 hours of sitting there, and we were beginning to get, we were trying to decide what we should do. If they were going to, because now they were talking about deporting us. They had sent people from all the airlines that we had come in on to tell us when our flights out would be, and we, are we going to refuse to go? What are we going to, how are we going to handle this? And somewhere in there, by the way, I had letters from Senator Patrick Leahy, Senator Bernie Sanders, and Representative Peter Welch with me supporting my trip. And I tried to show them those letters, and they weren't too interested. He said, "Oh yes, I'll tell someone about them." I said, "You don't need the letters." No, I'll tell someone. Mm-hmm. And another thing I wanted to mention was they went from being kind of not so friendly to then they'd come in with a thing of Cokes and little bars of chocolate. It was kind of a good cop, bad cop scenario going on there. Mm-hmm. And at one point I was standing, I had my camera equipment. I do video stuff. So I had a sort of large camera, and I took it out at one point. And everyone got very nervous at that point. so I put it back. I did get some shots with my iPhone. But I was standing over a couch at the counter right after I'd taken the camera out, and a man who had said he didn't speak, this sort of timid kind of functionary there, said he didn't speak any English. So anytime we tried to communicate with him, he just pushed us away. But I was sitting there, and he came over to me when no other Egyptian security police or anyone were in the room, just this man and all of the women. And he came over to me and very quietly said to me, "Please be careful. You are in danger, and I could be in danger." And then he went away.
And you had known by this time that Medea had been beaten.
Oh yeah, we knew that before we went, and I don't think there was one person in this 100-woman delegation that backed out. Some people were told before they left home, I believe, that they couldn't get in. In any case, so there was a sense that some of these people were fearful for their own jobs, for their own for their own skin. There's something, this new government with Sisi is I think we weren't the only ones that were afraid. Yeah. In any case, so at some point we were demanding something to eat. We were all hungry. We were all weary. We traveled long distances to be there, and by now there are several women from Belgium with us, and one woman from France, I believe, and two of the women who were with us spoke Arabic, which helped enormously. Anyway, they said, okay, we're going to get you something to eat. Come with us. And we said, well, why don't you just bring it here? And they said, well, no, there's tables upstairs. We're just going to take you to a room where you can get something to eat. And in our naivete, we went. Two of the women from France decided not to come with. Mm-hmm. We didn't know they weren't coming. We thought they were coming, but they didn't. And we got in an elevator. They took us upstairs through the concourse and into a gate area, and that is where we were kept for the next 20 some hours. They never let us back out of there. And so what happened following us was, this whole French delegation, which was about 40 women, came through, as well as there was a smattering of other more Americans and Belgian. We had a Swiss woman with us up there, and they were all detained downstairs. They refused to give up their passports. I had handed my passport to the passport at the gate there, and they just kept it. So these women wouldn't give them their passports, and most of them. So they were had a little more control, I guess, than we did. And so we had no idea that they were even being detained downstairs. At one point when we were still downstairs in the immigration office, they wanted everyone paired with their luggage. And I had checked a bag, and my friend who had gone before me and gotten in, had gotten both of our bags off the carousel and was waiting for me downstairs. And she had actually gotten a SIM card and had called me and told me she was downstairs with the luggage. And before I could say, I think you should just go to the hotel, I think you should leave, they wanted me off the phone, and they said, we're going to find your luggage. And they identified her and two other women who were with her, all Americans. And, these security police just swooped around them and brought them back to those benches behind the passport desk where we had originally been. And, we thought, oh my God, they were in, and now they're going to be here. But after an hour or so, they let them go, which was just very strange because there was no real rhyme or reason for why.
But they didn't get into Gaza either.
They did not get into Gaza. No one got into Gaza. There are still 17 women in Cairo. Some of them have tried to come home early, but not been able to get flights out.
Mm-hmm.
So
let's talk about Gaza. If your group had been able to get there, what was the plan? What were we going to visit?
We had been invited by numerous women's organizations in Gaza. We had been, they apparently approached the French group. This was the whole trip was planned by this French group. And then they asked Code Pink to organize a group from the United States to join them. The women there are feeling so cut off. I mean, everyone there is, but we were particularly approached by, mothers and women. They don't have just basic supplies, clean water, electricity, to take care of their children. The medical care is almost non-existent, and they're just living in these terrible circumstances, and they just needed support. They really just wanted to know that people in the international community were aware of their plight. And so we were going for International Women's Day, which is March 8th, and we were carrying our primary thing was we were carrying solar lanterns so that they could have light. So we had a lot of solar lanterns, but there were a lot of other things. The Swiss woman who was with my group that got detained, Yasmin, had microscopes for the hospital that they needed. Another friend coming from New York had laptops that we were bringing for students. I had in New York met with a friend who had been in Gaza, and his interpreter had been a young woman who was now studying in New York, and her family is still in Gaza. Her sister was about to have a baby, and so in my suitcase I had infant items and clothes and toys for her little nephew, a little chessboard, as well as a friend of mine had recently been to the West Bank, and she's an herbalist and had collected herbs along the wall that were growing along the wall and brought them back to the States and combined some of these herbal things. She mixes herbal remedies with Vermont herbs and created this thing called Solidarity Salve. It's like in a chapstick tube, but it's sort of like a natural neosporin to heal wounds and cuts and scrapes and so on. And I had a bag full of those.
And I assume none of these things made it into Gaza.
No. And, I'm about to mail today back to the guy in New York that gave me these baby items and the little chessboard and so on. It makes me cry. Mm-hmm. Because with this, if this border opening is closed through Egypt, we haven't been able to get through Israel for some time. Everybody knows the things that have happened when people have tried to go in by sea. These people are completely cut off. We were going because we felt like this was, we had to keep trying. When the Muslim Brotherhood was in, apparently there was no problem getting through that border crossing. But this new military regime in Egypt is another story altogether.
Can I ask you, when did you first get interested in the Palestinian issue?
My very first experience with it, I was living in Paris, France, and my daughter was 5 years old, and we took a girlfriend of hers, a little girl, out for an outing on a Sunday, and we were going to be an hour or so late getting back, and this was just after the massacres at the Palestinian refugee camps in Sabra and Shatila and in Beirut. And the mother was Swedish, and I'd never met the father of this little girl, and she gave me a phone number to call her mother, and they didn't answer, and the family had been going on a picnic, so I thought, well, they're just not back either. And we arrived about an hour late, and when the mother opened the door, she fell to her knees and grabbed her daughter and just started sobbing. And then she was very angry with me.
Mm-hmm.
And she said, "My husband is at your apartment waiting for you." And I learned that the husband was Palestinian and that his entire family was in those refugee camps that were where the massacres took place. And they had no word of them. And they figured out that my last name was probably Jewish. And they just, when I was late, they feared for their daughter's life. And I got to my apartment, and the father was there, and his reaction was somewhat different when he saw me, and I was able to tell him he embraced me. And that
was 1982, so
right.
It's been a long time that you've known about that situation. Do you know if people in Gaza have found out about what happened to your mission, and are they talking about it?
I believe that people have been in touch with their friends there and the delegations that invited us. I think that there has been communication. I'm not, as I say, it was organized by a woman named Olivia in France, and I actually noticed just before this call there's an email from her, but I haven't had a chance to read it yet. I know that the French were just amazing. That group that got detained, they were protesting behind the passport gates, but in full view of the passengers coming, Egyptians and foreigners, for their flights. They would see these women, and they were singing and dancing, and they sat down and refused to give up their passports. And when an officer would want to speak to them, they would not get up and go speak to them. That officer had to come to where they were sitting on the floor. So, the French are amazing, and I guess they're planning some huge demonstrations in Paris, and then talking about a big international demonstration.
What about reactions in Vermont? Any politicians come to talk to you, or newspapers, or?
Not yet. I mean, I don't think most people know I'm even back. I intend to contact all of the, Leahy, Sanders, and Welch to let them know what happened. While I was incarcerated, this is actually kind of important, the French consul came in 3 times. Immediately, the French had someone there speaking out on their behalf, trying to help get them in. From what I understand, Anne Wright was calling the U.S. Embassy, and their response was, any country has a right to detain anyone or prevent anyone from entering their country that they wish. It was just that we were brushed off. Finally, after...
But the French officials didn't feel that way towards their citizens.
No, they were there, and they even talked to us. They talked to me. They said, this guy said, listen, if you want to, they say if we're blacklisted that we can never go back. We were detained, deported, and blacklisted. And there's something written across my visa in Arabic, but I think it says, no entry.
Mm-hmm.
But he said you should come over a period of time. Do not announce your arrival. We had, because we were trying to get the Egyptian government to let us through the border at Rafah, and so they were playing by the rules, and so they had all of our names coming in. And he said, you have to come over a period of 10 days or 2 weeks as tourists. And go there.
The French official was telling you.
Told us that, yeah. When
the Americans didn't give you any advice, they just said.
Well, finally they did. Finally they came. I don't know what would have happened. We were told we were going to be on a 3 a.m. flight after we were detained in this gate area, and 3 a.m. came and went, and they would just say, sit down 5 minutes. The plane was canceled, they'd say. I mean, they lied. every step of the way, and the plane was canceled. And then we'd go online and see that the plane had just taken off. It was interesting because they seemed to be blocking internet, but then every now and then it would open up. So we were all trying to, because we all had our devices. They never checked our luggage. They never, if we were such security risks, one would wonder why they never even looked at what we were carrying.
Well, I have one last question. What do you think of our Congress that at the start of this year passed a bill that would gradually that would gradually restore all the suspended military aid to the Egyptian regime?
I'm shocked, confused, furious at this government with everything, with the support of the blanket support of Israel and what they do to the Palestinians. And I think that we have to become much more aware of what's going on in Egypt. I think that there are people there, as I told you, this one guy at the desk, came over and whispered to me that he was in danger and we were in danger, to be careful when no one else was around that might hear him. And I think there are people in peril. We to support either regime is, to me, an atrocity.
Well, thank you very much for this interview.
Thank you for talking to me.
And thanks to everybody for listening. This is Stanley Heller for The Struggle.